morning or almost afternoon. I want to warn you before we get started, this is not traditional speech. It's built around memories that were sort of mileposts on this journey. It has some objectionable language, and I may cry, so don't worry, it's fine, but just warning you, I do that sometimes when I talk about this stuff. And I would also ask you, you're the youngest audience I've ever spoken to about these things. So if you hear references to things that you go, what is that? Please ask me afterwards. We're going to have a Q&A session. And if there are references I make to things that you don't understand or are familiar with, please follow up afterward and I can explain it to you. We are driving down a country road, and I see one of the black lawn jockeys in front of a modest brick ranch house. I glance in the rearview mirror to see if the kids notice and think about how I'll explain if they ask. Heads together, braids touching. They're laughing about some shared secret. They aren't even looking out the windows, but as I flash by the grinning clown face, my heart seizes up with anger. I want to smash them all. Tear down the flagpoles that still fly the Confederate flag, and set fire to anything that looks like terror. Erase it from my homeland, my heart, my past. I take a deep breath and remember. It was not force or violence that woke me from my own southern slumber. It was love. There was a time when I was in love with all things southern, when I really believed that Gone with the Wind was a wistful epic of a more fine and genteel era swept away by the dirty Yankees. I think I may have actually believed the unstated premise of Gone with the Wind, that the end of slavery was actually made things worse for black people because it separated them from this benevolent patriarchy. There was nothing romantic or genteel about the racial landscape of my childhood. Blacks and whites lived in two separate worlds, and the worst thing you could call anybody was a nigger lover. Those were fighting words, an insult of character that surpassed all other insults. Of course, it wasn't really about love. Just showing kindness to a black person was enough to earn the designation in those days. Actually, loving a black person was unthinkable. Nobody ever set me down in a chair and instructed me on the inherent superiority of white people. My instruction in racism was all the more insidious and powerful because every facet of life was shot through with it. That's how ideology works. How I came to be married to a black man with two biracial children is my story, but it's also the story of a generation. It's the story of unlearning racism. I spent the first 10 years of my life learning racism, and like many things that you learn in those early years, you can spend the rest of your life unlearning it. We often don't try. It's easier to stay in our own separate worlds, pretending that this deep chasm between us doesn't exist. We don't cross because we don't have a good enough reason and because we don't have the will to try. I had a good reason. It turned out the man I'd been looking for my whole life was black. The power of that love gave me the will to try. My husband and I are part of the first generation of interracial couples to be able to marry legally in the United States. When I was born, it was still against the law. In my lifetime, I've seen the end of Jim Crow, the culmination of the Civil Rights Movement, forced busing, integration, and the election of the first African-American president. My story is rooted in the story of a generation that has seen the most radical change in race relations in American history. What I've tried to do is reflect on these experiences to see what we can learn from them about society and about ourselves, and what we can learn about how racism can be undone. I'm giving you personal experiences because I think you've heard enough lectures on this topic. Lectures connect with people on an intellectual level, but racism is embedded in a deeply emotional place. And I think it endures because people view it from a distance where they can stay removed from it. So we're going to get up close and personal. School desegregation was the turning point in my understanding of race relations, though not in the way anyone, particularly my father, intended. When integration finally came to Durham County in 1970, my parents sent me to a white flight private school, constructed, it seemed, overnight. Recess at Council Christian Academy was a sad affair. There was no gym and no equipment, so we mostly walked around the red clay grounds and the gravel paths in small groups and just talked. I was talking to my friend Ann when I saw them coming. The bully, who often bragged about how his father was a grand dragon in the clan, was leading a group. And it grew as they came closer, like a magnet was pulling people into the pack. "Ann Yates cheats," he chanted. "Ann Yates cheats," the crowd joined in. I watched, stunned, as they drew closer. Clan Boy was clearly enjoying himself. Some of the faces in the crowd looked angry. Some looked excited. Some just looked blank. It was the scariest thing I'd ever seen. My classmates had been transformed into a mob. "Ann Yates cheats! Ann Yates cheats!" Tears were streaking Ann's face, and her eyes were glazed with fear and shock. When we tried to walk away, they followed. "Ann Yates cheats!" I looked around for a teacher. I looked around for someone who would stop this. And then shock gave way to anger. I would not let this happen. I took Ann by the hand and made her look in my eyes. "Come on," I said, "we're leaving." I remember seeing the red dust on the ground and the silver gray gravel, but I looked up and fixed my eyes on the building where adults presumably held sway. The group followed us chanting until we got there. That was the day the world changed for me. I am not one of these people. For me, the connection was clear. It was all the same. What the Nazis did to the Jews, what white people were doing to black people, what Clan Boy had done to Ann. Some people just needed to find a victim, and I was not going to be one of those people. That was the beginning of my rejection of racism, but there was still so much I didn't understand. I didn't see that though I believed in an abstract way that black people should have equal rights and opportunities, I still held myself apart from them. I couldn't see that though I had been poor most of my life and struggled against abuse, I was still more privileged than any black person I knew. I believed in racial equality, but in an abstract way. Black people were still as different to me as aliens. It would be many years before I was actually friends with a black person, and even then the idea of dating a black person never entered my mind until I met her. The envelope has my uncle's return address. Inside is the invitation to our wedding reception. On the front is a photo of Herb's hand holding mine with the engagement ring displayed. It was our way of letting people know ours was an interracial union. It only seemed fair. Like a true Southerner, I wanted to save them the shock of walking in and finding out only then that my husband was black. And I wanted to save myself and everyone else from the kind of ugly reaction that might result. It looks as if the invitation might have been crumpled. Written on the back in an angry scrawl, it says, "This is the ugliest picture I've ever seen. You must be crazy. How could you do this to your mother?" For a second, I can't breathe. My lungs are stuffed with cotton. I take a deep, jagged breath, and tears of hurt and fury spring into my eyes. So all the time she said he loved me were just a lie, contingent on my keeping to the customs he believed in. This isn't about me and my happiness, it's about what I'm doing to other people. It cuts me to the core, this poison RSVP. And beyond the hurt is the sting of guilt. It holds at least a partial truth. This will have an impact on my mother. If her own brother reacts this way, what kind of disapproval and rejection will she have to endure from friends, co-workers? My sisters, too, will have to decide who to tell and who not to tell, whether to put our picture on the mantle with the others. For some of my relatives now, I am a source of shame. Sociologist Erica Childs says that interracial couples are the canary in the coal mine of racism. The reactions we get reveal the true level of toxicity that remains around race relations. We're the litmus test of racial tolerance. I feared hostility from strangers, but the people who would hurt me most would be members of my own family. I have not seen my father in 15 years since the day I told him I was marrying a black man. He has never met my husband or seen my children. It is one of the great tragedies of my life. But for every instance of racism I experienced outwardly, I uncovered another layer of racism within myself. One of the most humbling moments in this journey came a few months after Herb moved in with me. He'd been living for a year in Florida, and we were really happy to be together again. And I started to notice something. Everywhere I went, black people were looking at me differently with these wide open smiles. And even when I was alone, you know, little kids, old people, I couldn't figure it out. How could they know? But there was a connection there that had never been there before. And then it hit me. They hadn't changed. I had. For the first time in my life, I was really looking at black people rather than looking through them or past them. Like a lot of white people, I had been essentially ignoring black people my whole life without even being aware of it, and it filled me with shame. I would learn many lessons like this one, but I didn't truly appreciate the depth and pain of racism until we had children. Abby has grown quiet and sad as she gets ready for bed. When she finishes brushing her teeth, she begins to cry in great braying sobs. "Honey, what's wrong?" I say, drawing her close. "I never want to be taken away from you and Daddy," she says. I'm alarmed and confused. Where is this coming from? And I hold her tight. "Well, of course nobody's going to take you away. Why would they? Why would anybody take you away?" "They did that in the book," she says, her words hardly distinguishable because she's crying so hard. "They took the children away." The book is Follow the Drinking Gourd, a story about life under slavery and escape on the Underground Railroad. The part that so disturbed her was the practice of children being sold away from their parents. "They took them away," she wails again, choking with fear and horror. "I know, baby," I say, holding her close. "It was awful. They can't do that anymore." My heart contracts painfully as I comfort her because she identifies with the story in a way that I can never really appreciate. She shares a heritage with people who were systematically robbed of their humanity by people who look like me. It will always be there, and there's nothing I can do to change it. All I can do is help her try to understand it. What about the children? That's the first thing any interracial couple hears when they start publicly seeing each other. What about the children? A lot of the question is rooted in the belief that interracial relationships are somehow deviant, and as a result, the children, the offspring of this relationship, will be doomed and to a life of confusion. My children are not confused. They're smart. They're happy. They're beautiful kids, and they have taught me more about racism than I could have ever learned on my own. Though my husband and I still use them, my children resist the terms black and white. We grew up with them, my husband and I. They're just what we know. My daughters will not use those words. They do not, to them, describe human beings. Abby, if you ask her, will describe herself first by qualities of who she is. If you ask her about color, she'll say she's cinnamon. Camille, who is 9, describes herself as cookie dough brown, her father as dark chocolate, and me as peach. They know that race is about more than color. And I think it's the value-laden distinctions that are embedded in those words is the reason they resist using them so much. But when they are asked if they ever wish their parents were the same race, they always say no. When I asked Camille why, she said it made her special. It made her unique. And Abby saw it as an advantage. She said, I'm really happy to be two different things because then I can learn about the two different races and see what they think and do about things. It is my hope that children like mine, who will be the first generation of biracial kids to actually have a visible cohort, because there are a lot more of them now, will be the bridge across the racial divide. I find in my own story a reason to hope. If I can make this journey from a profoundly racist background to a member of a racially blended family, there's no reason to believe that others can't break the cycle of generationally transmitted racism. How did I get here? I had to see black people as people first, to really see them as individuals with hopes, dreams, problems, ambitions just like me, to acknowledge their humanity as equal to my own. I had to recognize my own complicity in the system of white privilege. Whether or not I take advantage of it, and whether or not I agree with it, I realize the benefits of my skin color every day of my life. When I apply for a job, walk into a jewelry store, or even buy a Band-Aid. I had to acknowledge to myself and to my husband my own failings in regard to racism. When you bring these things into the light, they lose their power over you. It's when we harbor them and try to deny they exist that they maintain their hold on us. And I had to realize that it is a journey. There's no single moment where the scales fall from your eyes and all is revealed. Those moments happen, but it takes a lot of those moments, many such moments of knowing, to effect more than momentary change. Something as pervasive as racism can't be totally revealed in one incident or two. It can't be unlearned in one incident or two. It's taken me most of my life to appreciate the complexity of racism and the ways in which it's woven into the fabric of American life. I had to atone, and that means relinquishing white privilege on a daily basis in all the ways that I can, by making sure clerks don't take me in front of a black person who was there first, by becoming aware of situations that subtly exclude others and taking steps to make sure that others are not only invited but made to feel comfortable, by calling other white people on words and actions that offend, disempower, or disenfranchise others, but doing it in a way that promotes understanding and not argumentation. It's hard to face our uncomfortable truths, and harder still to voice them. My hope is that sharing this journey with you, with others, will help people acknowledge and recognize their own struggles with racism. Thank you. And now you get to ask questions. There are two mics here. I think there's one up there somewhere. If you have questions about anything, people usually do. Because this is just a snapshot in a wide span. I have a question for you guys. How do you think your parents would feel if you were dating someone of another race? Do you think they'd be okay with that?
I'll get it kicked off as far as the question goes, and hope that students will come forward too. You mentioned that we often exclude others in subtle and